Hello, fourth graders. We are on chapter 42 of Holes. We're getting closer to the end. In chapter 41, Zero admits to stealing the shoes and that he would spend some time at the homeless shelter. I really need to go fill up my coffee, but now that I've already pressed play, I'm not going to. Here we go, chapter 42. Zero became strong enough to help dig the hole. When he finished, it was over 6 feet deep. He filled the bottom with rocks to help separate the water from the dirt. He was still the best hole digger around. That's the last hole I will ever dig, he declared, throwing down the shovel. Stanley smiled. He wished it were true, but he knew they had no choice but to eventually return to Camp Green Lake. They couldn't live on onions forever. They had been completely around Big Thumb. It was like a giant sundial. They followed the shade. They were able to see out in all directions, and there was no place to go. The mountain was surrounded by desert. Zero stared at Big Thumb. It must have a hole in it, he said, filled with water. You think? Where else could the water be coming from? Zero asked. Water doesn't run uphill. Stanley bit into an onion. It didn't burn his eyes or nose, and in fact, he no longer noticed a particularly strong taste. He remembered when he had first carried Zero up the hill how the air had smelled bitter. It was the smell of thousands of onions growing and rotting and sprouting. Now he didn't smell a thing. How many onions do you think we've eaten? He asked. Zero shrugged. I don't know. How long we've been here? I'd say about a week, said Stanley. And we probably each eat about 20 onions a day, so that's 280 onions, said Zero. Stanley smiled. I bet we really stink. 2 nights later, Stanley lay awake staring up at the star-filled sky. He was too happy to fall asleep. He knew he had no reason to be happy. He had heard or read somewhere that right before a person freezes to death, he suddenly feels nice and warm. He wondered if perhaps he was experiencing something like that. It occurred to him that he couldn't remember the last time he felt happiness. It wasn't just being sent to Camp Green Lake that had made his life miserable. Before that, he'd been unhappy at school where he had no friends and bullies like Derek Doone picked on him. No one liked him, and the truth was, he didn't especially like himself. He liked himself now. He wondered if he was delirious. He looked over at Zero sleeping near him. Zero's face was lit in the starlight, and there was a flower petal in front of his nose that moved back and forth as he breathed. It reminded Stanley of something out of a cartoon. Zero breathed in, and the petal was drawn almost touching his nose. Zero breathed out, and the petal moved toward his chin. It stayed on Zero's face for an amazingly long time before fluttering off to the side. Stanley considered placing it back in front of Zero's nose, but it wouldn't be the same. It seemed like Zero had lived at Camp Green Lake forever, but as Stanley thought about it, he realized that Zero had gotten no more than a month or 2 before him. Zero was actually arrested a day later, but Stanley's trial kept getting delayed because of baseball. He remembered that Zero had said a few weeks before, if Zero had just kept those shoes, then neither of them would be here right now. As Stanley stared at the glittering night sky, he thought there was no place he would rather be. He was glad Zero put the shoes on the parked car. He was glad they fell from the overpass and hit him on the head. When the shoes first fell from the sky, he remembered thinking that destiny had struck him. Now he thought so again. It was more than a coincidence. It had to be a destiny.
Mama.
Hi, Brooks. Say hi to my students. Say hi.
Hi.
When the shoes fell from the sky, oh yes, destiny. Maybe they wouldn't have to return to Camp Green Lake, he thought. Maybe they would make it past the camp, then follow the dirt road back to civilization. They could fill the sack with onions and the 3 jars with water, that they had canteens as well. They could refill their jars and canteens at the camp, maybe sneak into the kitchen and get some food. He doubted any counselors were still on the guard. Everyone had to think they were dead. Buzzard food. It would mean living the rest of their life as a fugitive. The police would... Shh, real quick. I'm almost done. The police would always be after him. At least... Yeah. Right now, Mommy needs to finish her book. It would mean living the rest of their life as a fugitive. The police would always be after him. At least he could call his parents and tell them he was still alive. But he couldn't go visit them in case the police were watching the apartment. Although if everyone thought he was dead, they wouldn't bother to watch the apartment. Now I'm really thinking crazy, he thought. He wondered if a crazy person wonders if he's crazy. But even as it was, an even crazier idea popped into his head. He knew it was too crazy to even consider. Still, he was going to be a fugitive for the rest of his life. It would help to have money, perhaps a treasure chest full of money. You're crazy, he told himself. Besides, just because you found a lipstick container with KB on it, that doesn't mean there was a treasure buried there. It was crazy. It was all part of his crazy feelings of happiness. Or maybe it was destiny. He reached over and shook Zero's arm. Hey, Zero, he whispered. Huh, Zero muttered. Zero, wake up. What? Zero raised up his head. What is it? You want to dig one more hole? Stanley asked him. Here ends chapter 42.
Done.
Done. All done. Say all done.
Done.